So I was going to talk to you guys about wire today, maybe give you some tips and tricks and some stuff to practice on that will make you a better welder. So if you're not a professional, flux core tends to have like a bad track record. The welds usually look like crap. There's always splatter everywhere. But if you're a professional, you know its uses and where it benefits from, etc., etc. So before I really get into it, there's a pet peeve I have of mine, and that's what people call flux core. So this is straight flux core wire. There is no gas bottle, no CO2 going through the nozzle to make this weld. No gas. Now if I hook this bottle up with a regulator to that machine and ran flux core dual shield, which is gas shielded and flux core, then it would make a different type of weld. The issue I have here, and I have no idea why these instructors and all these kids call dual shield flux core, because they're actually two different processes, two completely different wires, two completely different things. So in the field, we call it either flux core or dual shield. Now in schools and stuff, and especially the weld supplies, I've walked in and asked for flux core wire, got all the way home and they gave me dual shield wire. I hardly ever run dual shield wire. I really wish people would understand that so that there's no discrepancies there, especially if you go to welding all day and they're like, yeah, the inspector wants all that flux core, and you go out there and run it straight wire with no gas and he actually wanted dual shield. Well, now you're in a fucking quite the predicament. All right, rant over. So let's get into some welding tips and tricks. First of all, these machines have presets for different gauge material: 12, 14, 16, 18 gauge. This is 14 gauge, but I actually welded it on the 16 gauge setting because I like the way it runs there better. It's slower, but you get more puddle manipulation and you don't get your burn through. So if I was to weld this vertical down, I would probably use the same settings. If I welded it vertical up, I would actually probably go to the 18 gauge settings, because those different types of welding progression usually take different types of heat. For instance, here is what that flat weld looks like in the rollout wheel, but it was on the 14 gauge setting. Awfully hot. Not gonna work. So to be a better welder and improve yourself with some practice coupons, purposely fuck yourself with a gap, and you will learn how that puddle moves and what needs to happen when it's close, when it's wide, etc. That also goes for these welds. Put a gap in there and try to weld it cold and get your build up and try to complete that weld the best you can. It's a cheap way to practice, and it will teach you a lot about puddle control and what the steel does. The same thing happens relatively with the thicker steels, but this is cheaper to practice on. You're going to actually overheat the metal more and understand better. Now, when are you ever going to run into that situation where you're running flux core in the field in position? Well, I've made a lot of money running grease duct for the tinners. All that stuff is 16 gauge, it's flanged, they cut it out on a plasma table, and it's 100% welded. Now, why is it welded? I think it's because they clean out the grease duct all the time. They don't want it leaking, and the way we inspect that is either with a smoke or a light test, and I've walked around with inspectors and done that. We have to cut in access points for the grease cleaners and so on and so forth. But what I'm trying to tell you guys is this will help you guys immensely with your puddle control. Make it uncomfortable to weld and try to get it done, because in the field sometimes stuff just doesn't line up and you've got to caulk it together. There's really no visual on that stuff, but like I said, it helps you be a better welder.